Welcome to the Millennial Body Image Project, where we dive into the unique and messy body image journey that continues to shape our generation.
We're here to flip the script on toxic wellness culture, challenge weight stigma, and tackle the intersectional forces that shape how we see our bodies and our health.
Because your body is not a problem to be fixed.
Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're here to talk all things millennial body image. And so today we're very excited to have a guest who's going to be talking about pop culture with us. So Pam, welcome onto the show. We're really excited to have you here.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm honored that you thought of me for this topic. More serious than what I usually get to cover. So,
Well, we're hoping to have it be a little bit light because it can be so serious.
I mean, like all millennials, like I think we all just process our trauma through humor, which is like maybe good, maybe bad. But it does kind of make it feel a little bit more palatable.
Yes. Oh my gosh. 100%.
100%.
Okay. So we would love if, Pam, you could get started actually by telling the listeners, if they haven't heard of you on Millennial or What the Hype or occasional guest appearances on Mogulecast, a little bit more about you and your background in being immersed in pop culture.
Yes. So I'm Pamela. Pam is usually what everybody calls me. I just introduce myself as Pamela because it sounds more professional, but we're all friends here, so that's fine. And I'm a pop culture and entertainment journalist and a longtime podcast host. Like Dana was saying, I'm part of like I guess like what we'd like to call now the Hypeable family of podcasts, which really kind of started with Mugglecast many, many eons ago. And I've just been podcasting with my friends ever since about a variety of pop culture topics. And yeah, I'm lucky enough to also just have turned pop culture into my career. So I've written for a bunch of different online outlets, big and small, like Billboard, Entertainment Weekly, East People's Choice Awards, and also Hypeable as well before we shuttered that site. And now I host two different podcasts. One is Millennial, and that's just kind of like general lifestyle, but also politics and pop culture. And we try and kind of frame it through the eyes of millennials, because we are all millennials on that panel, and kind of tailor the stories that we discuss on that show to address how they affect our generation specifically. And then What the Hype is our newest venture. It's all pop culture. We're having so much fun with that show over there as well. It's kind of structured in a way to kind of hopefully give you guys the dives that you need into different fandoms, even if you're new or if you're like well initiated. So like our tagline basically is we're taking you from fan to stan every week. So we have deep dives, deeper dives, deepest dives. And it's been a lot of fun to kind of cover all aspects of pop culture over there.
Amazing. Yeah, I'm really excited. I actually was poking around on What the Hype, and I saw some stuff on ACOTAR and Bridgerton, and I'm like, oh, this is where my people are.
Yes, come join us. It's so much fun.
Oh my God, you should come in and listen to all things.
Yes, please do.
And get really... Yeah, so as far as I'm concerned, you're like the expert in pop culture for the millennials in the world. That's how I feel.
Oh, I love it.
And good, I like that. Good. I'm glad you're accepting. But, we were really interested in you talking about the intersection of pop culture and kind of body image, in how this is like how millennials in a way are really have a very disrupted self-perception and body image, like almost like they're almost recommends, as we saw growing up in pop quickly of like some major themes or moments that come to mind about what maybe was like an integral pop culture moment that our millennial, like the millennial body image.
I think that the one quote that always sticks out to me, this was more like the 90s, so like not really 2000s, but I feel like it really seeped over into the 2000s, is when Kate Moss said, "Nothing tastes as good as skinny feels." And I feel like that haunts so many people. And I think that's just such a fantastic tentpole in a weird way for this conversation, because so much of that era, as a result of what was trending in fashion and in pop culture, kind of came at the expense of kind of depraving yourself in a way. And even if you look at the way that the pop culture icons, or who was hot at the time, were being framed, so often, especially women specifically, were being praised for their bodies and not for their talent. So I specifically remember like Britney's I'm a Slave for You music video, for example, that everybody is talking about her body and how amazing she looks. And she does look amazing in that music video. I was just revisiting that because my friends and I were rewatching Glee and they did like a whole Britney episode too. And like, so all the costumes are coming back to me and stuff like that. But like that comes primary to what we should probably have been focusing on, which is the choreography, the dancing, the endurance, and like the vocals. Even though Britney wasn't like a powerhouse vocalist, everybody was kind of more focused on the body image. And the same can be said for like any of the pop princesses of that time or like the actresses as well.
100%. I actually think, it's funny, the Britney and the Slave video, I immediately am like, what an iconic moment in time, looking back and thinking about it from like your own childhood of her with that boa constrictor around her, like alive. And she's wearing that whole green outfit. And all you see is basically from to bone. Right. And it's like her body is
abs and good.
Her,
I can't imagine the pressure she must have been under at such a young age.
Oh my God.
That physique up. Obviously you're working, and dancing, tens of hours a day, but it comes at a price. So,
the hyperfixation around food and movement and all of the things that she probably had to do to get that. And then God forbid she not maintain it, which we know has happened throughout her history and the ways that people came to her back then. I mean, I remember in my own watching Britney Spears come in, and I was probably like a young tween at the time when Hit Me Baby One More Time came out, and thinking like, oh my gosh, this is what teenagers look like. And this is how you're supposed to look and feel. And these are the outfits you're supposed to wear. And all of this, I think you just named really two major moments with Kate Moss. I think that is such a big, I remember hearing all the way through adulthood, even now, like if you go to the gym, people I feel like people say that kind of stuff and things like that. And I'm wondering, I wonder how much you've heard throughout the time, like that whole type of saying that came up.
It's so interesting because as soon as you said that, Pam, my first thought was that was on every single girl's Pinterest board that ever lived. And all of the kind of fit spo and thinspiration, which really brings us to a major theme of growing up as a millennial and being a fan of pop culture, is unfortunately the major theme of just the objectification of women's bodies. And as young girls at that time and being extremely impressionable, not even going into the different maybe behaviors or thoughts and beliefs about food and bodies that were being said to us and about us in our own homes or schools or anything. But when we look at these celebrities like Britney and Paris Hilton and Nicole Richie and Christina Aguilera and Lindsay Lohan, the Olsen twins, like all of these different women, so many of them were under so much intense pressure to be as thin as humanly possible that it probably spurned a generation of eating disorders. When us thinking, oh, in order to be popular, in order to be liked, or in order to be all these things that we wanted as middle schoolers, high schoolers, or even younger than that, I need to be thin. And this doesn't even necessarily yet go into the conversation around health and everything. But I remember going to the grocery store with my mom as a young girl and seeing the National Enquirer and seeing all these different tabloids of like, oh, Jessica Simpson let herself go. And oh, look at, this person, or look at Britney having her mental breakdown. And it was like our bodies were the poster child for how good we were, how popular we were, how well we were doing, how our mental health was and everything. And it's no wonder that we, to this day, like Pam, you said, we process our trauma through humor, because what else can we do? There's so many different, very pervasive influences on our body image just from pop culture during this time. It's hard not to see it.
Yeah, and it's so funny because I think if you would have asked me at the time if pop culture was influencing how I felt about my body, I probably would have said no. It wasn't because I wasn't paying attention to pop culture, but it's because I don't think most people realize how influential pop culture is. Pop culture, one of the things that I love about it is that it has the power to do some really good stuff. Like it has the power to influence minds and introduce people to worlds and maybe like thought processes that they hadn't thought about before that are a lot more relatable, palatable if they're coming from a source of entertainment. But it also has the power to do some bad stuff. And when you think about how like pop culture even influences fashion and vice versa, I think that's where a lot of us started maybe feeling the pressure to fit in. Because when you look at the style of, heroin chic, these really low, ultra low waist jeans that were really only made for a specific body type, like going back to school shopping was the worst. Like, and I dreaded it. I know my mother dreaded it because I just hated everything that was on my body. And it was really hard to find like larger sizes too if you existed even in a slightly larger body. Nowadays, I mean, like I remember like having to go like prom dress shopping in the city because I lived in the suburbs because they just didn't carry past maybe like a size 10 at the Macy's in my hometown. So we had to drive an hour away because it's like, oh, like they'll have more body types in San Francisco than they will in the suburbs or in the East Bay because there's more diversity. I grew up in a very white suburban area and they were really very much tailoring to that heroin chic body type. And I mean, to be fair, it was predominantly thin and white as well in my high school. So why wouldn't they? That's what was selling.
Mm-hmm.
But that ends up taking a toll over the years even as well. And that,
well, yeah, I mean, of course, yeah, I mean, of course it is, right? Like, how can that not then influence internal processes of like, well, I don't belong here unless smaller, it can like really make you feel that way. And if you don't have access to stuff that fits in your body and then you have to wear stuff that's not stylish, then especially when we think of our clothing and the way that we like, that's like an expression of ourselves and our style. And if we don't have access to stuff that help us feel like we can be a part of that in some way, then it does feel incredibly exclusionatory, right? It leads to when you were talking about the images, Dana, like the Fitspo and the Pinterest, I immediately remember friends and people putting pictures of models on their like refrigerators and in their home, like in these places or on their mirror in their bedroom as inspiration for them. These were my inspiration photos. And like when you have that coming at you, bombarding you over and over again, and also too, like you go, like you said, Pam, like going shopping and you can't find things that's like, I mean, it's a style that you said it only fits one body style. And that's not something that is naturally attainable for 99.9% of the world out. You're kind of forced to engage in behaviors. No wonder we couldn't Google stuff, right? Like, it's like maybe I'm really aging myself as a millennial, but Google wasn't around when I was younger. I didn't Google like how to be thinner or what can I do or whatever. That happened, but when younger, you just kind of felt, you would feel overlooked. And then when you got older, you could feel there was almost like a sense of power in feeling like you had the capacity and the ability now to take ownership of your body, right? Like, or perceived ownership.
Because it's something you can control, right? They're out of your control, but you can control, like, say, what you put in your mouth or what you don't put in your mouth or like your body or what you don't put on your body, but only to an extent. So it's easier to control, say, your weight if you can, or if you figure out a way that works for you, right? Healthy or unhealthy. So yeah, it's just like, it's just a spiral, honestly. And I think that's like, it's such a disconnect when I talk to people that are Gen Z, especially like younger Gen Z, and they don't understand like why millennials are so triggered by like low rise jeans coming back. It's like, it's because we didn't have that was the only option available if you wanted to shop in the junior section.
Yeah.
And if you went over to like the women, God forbid you had to go over to the women's section, like, and you were, not like a teenager, because then it was all like business casual. So we're like severely traumatized by the fact that there were not, 10 options when you walked into the store in terms of like of pants.
There were no different
It was
cuts.
one option and that's it.
Or you were wearing boot cut and you look, and like, no.
Shorts too, like the short inseams. Like, I don't know if y'all remember that too. They were like, you had to like struggle to find like a 5-inch inseam, which seems insane for like children, right? Yeah. Like the fact that like the average inseam was like 2 inches
not
It was really
not to really date ourselves now, but have you seen what the kids are wearing now? And this is not a joke, right? So I coach swimming. And so I am exposed to kids of all ages, but the primary age is between 6 and 18. So I see these kids from the time they're like little babies all the way to when they go to college. And then some of them even come back to help coach with me. And it's so interesting to see what the cool kids are doing. And it's just, I can literally see your butt cheeks. We lived through the age of, you remember those Sofie shorts or whatever? We like roll and roll
and they're
roll
coming back,
right?
I don't know if you've seen that
if
they're
you
coming
wanna
back.
roll those
I
on.
know. No, they're coming back. I'm waiting for when the kids are going to start wearing juicy across their butts again, or because they're wearing
Oh my
juicy
God, it's gonna
tracksuits
happen.
already, like
Right.
matching sets and everything. But it's so crazy to me. And I think, again, like Pam, you were saying, this is why we're so triggered by low-rise jeans, but also all this other stuff is we just want to be comfortable now. After living through COVID, it's the last thing I want is to wear low-rise jeans again. I specifically remember wearing those, I don't know if it was middle school or high school, but your biggest fear was like, is my butt crack showing because of how low these jeans are? Is my cooch about to come out because of how low this is? And then we all had to wear those huge, like really wide belts, and you had to make sure that the belt loops were big enough and all this other stuff. But I do want to go back to one thing that you guys were saying is this is really setting the stage for not only not being able to find stuff in a size that fits you in like the stores that are available to you, but really setting the scene for whiteness and thinness is best, because that is what was really mostly represented in pop culture, whether it's celebrities or it's music or other stuff. And this was probably also reinforced by family, body, and food talk, even if your parents weren't dieters. When we look at from childhood, we have Barbie and we have Disney, and we have then as tweens, we have Lizzie McGuire and Friends and the Olsen twins, and we have the OC, and we have Laguna Beach, and we have all these different things. Everything is white and thin. So no wonder we all thought that was the standard that we needed to work towards in order to be liked, in order to belong, and in order to feel included, or depending on where you're coming from, less marginalized and less discriminated against as like a protective measure. Also, I mean, it's a hard time to grow up, y'all.
Pam, I'm kind of interested in your thoughts on like, where do you feel like it evolved from in pop culture? Like if you're going back in time and you're looking back on a timeline, like when like thinner heroin chic to when it really became about the body size itself. Because yes, that was definitely something that was there. Then we have entered like The Biggest Loser and that movie Heavyweights and Shallow Hal. Like all of those happened kind of around the same time, but not at the same time, I don't think, as, the heroin chic, low rise jeans. And so I'm wondering, like, where did it start to become what I'm going with? Like, when did it become this thing that became like a moral obligation and your body had like more towards now it's like, diets and changing your body and you better be smaller and now your health is a problem.
So my mom was a dieter. She did Atkins in South Beach for sure, from what I remember. And that must have been Atkins definitely came first. So, and obviously that affects the household, right? Because also I should state that my mom was a single parent and we lived predominantly with her. So of course, like most working mothers, like you're going to eat how they eat and you're going to eat the food that they put in the fridge. So it's like almost near impossible for that not to trickle down to children, I think. You all can correct me if I'm wrong, though, because you're the experts here.
No, it definitely does.
Yeah. Okay. So that must have been, and she was probably a little bit late to the game, but that must have been when I was at like freshman year of high school or somewhere around there. So that must have been like maybe like around 2005-ish, somewhere around there. That would make sense.
Yeah.
But again, she was like late to the game. But you're right. Maybe around like that time and whenever like The Biggest Loser started airing, that was a huge pop culture moment. But I also remember like before that, every year, I think it was like People that used to put out that issue with like you all remember what I'm talking about, that they would just like let people submit themselves, like average people, talking about how much weight they had lost throughout the year. That was like a huge tentpole
That
annual issue
was.
for them. And it was like, oh, if
You know
like
what?
Jenny down the street can do it, you can do it too. Look how fat she used to be. Look how
Yeah.
skinny she is now.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So
Oh, and they did. They used to have those little photos,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like before and after, like the
yes,
rise of before and after
y-
photos of average, like a regular, like your neighbor down the street, like you're saying. I think
yeah.
another really iconic moment where we became with health and body changes was with Oprah. And it'd be like really hard to now talk about,
God,
pop culture and Oprah and the way that she, like, remember when she wheeled out this, like her, like the equivalent of the amount of like body weight had lost. I mean, I hope I'm not triggering anyone who's listening to the podcast right now.
yeah,
Like, I'm just gonna throw that out there. But that also feels like a really iconic, then feeling like almost like this, because there became, when it became a moral obligation. And if you didn't do that and you didn't uphold to that, then you deserved to be like, right? Because that's when, of the big, I'm thinking of like Julian Michaels, right? When
yeah,
she came in and started doing her thing. And that was like a reality TV, like obsession as a culture, people watching people get basically beaten, and publicly kind of ostracized and showing like that, almost like this like glorification and permission slip to shame people in a different body size than your own if you weren't in like a straight body size. And that also feels like a big iconic type of moment that would have a huge influence on us. I'm wondering, like, as you were kind of immersed in pop culture as a journalist, like, do you feel like you see these types of themes showing up at various different times when you're covering events, when you're covering music, the things that maybe even like the outlets ask you to focus on, I wonder too.
I've never been put in a position where I've been asked to ask somebody like how they lost all that weight, for example. I think that if
Mhm.
I had ever had I would have been uncomfortable doing that too. I would still be uncomfortable doing that. And I would say that to my editor or producer. But in terms of just like from what I've seen, it's so funny. Like the last time I noticed it, and like where I notice it more nowadays, and not to say that this issue doesn't um predominantly and in more of like an imbalanced way affect women, but I see it a lot more in Hollywood in terms of like the male transformation. My friend
Mm,
Rachel and I had this huge conversation about, because we're both big Bridgerton fans, about Luke Newton's Men's Health interview. Luke Newton plays Colin
mhm.
Bridgerton. He's the star of season 3, which just came out this last spring.
Yeah.
And I was watching that interview and I was like, I just feel so sorry for him because, being embedded in fandom, like I've seen how awful people have been to him because he wasn't like super chiseled before they bumped him up to leading man. And then you read all these interviews like where he says, oh, like I read this line about like my character being described as sturdy. And I was like, gotta hit the gym. And so then you see all these like building blocks start to like form this bigger picture. And I'm reading this article and I'm just thinking like, I really hope that this person has good people around them and like understands that this is not sustainable. I think Henry Cavill has talked before about like foregoing water because it makes muscles pop more. I know that Zac Efron with his Netflix show also talked about how he realized that like keeping his Baywatch body was not sustainable long term. But it's almost like there's a disconnect with like the general public because all we see is like, that one moment on the screen and you expect these people to look that way all the time. And it is really refreshing to see men speak out about that. I know Channing Tatum has done so as well because his weight fluctuates quite a bit between, like Magic Mike status and just like normal dad status. And I really do hope
Yeah.
that is helpful to men as well that struggle. Not that women don't need to hear the same thing, but it is interesting to hear more men speaking out about it because in the early 2000s, to bring it back to the point of this episode, it was really mostly geared towards women and berating women's bodies. And you see that too in
Yeah.
like sitcoms as well, where like it's okay to have a mixed weight relationship as long as the man is the one that's overweight. compensate by being funny, right? But
Yeah.
a woman can't. Like, her worth is directly related to her weight.
100%. Well, I mean, we see that on Friends, right?
Yes.
Chandler like basically said, I never would have dated you. I was not interested. I did not find you attractive. My friend's like bigger sister, and I did not think you were cute until she lost weight. And then there was like a whole episode about how he like completely changed the way he looked at her after she got significantly smaller than she talked about that a lot. I mean, there was so much of that and almost like that time in her life was like the butt of a lot of the jokes.
I didn't realize how much of that they put into specifically the first few seasons until I was rewatching it as an adult. I think probably when HBO Max launched, because they launched with, I'll rewatch Friends. That'll be like a nice little background thing. And it really like, it was injected so much into the humor of that show that it actually started making me feel uncomfortable, especially when they brought out the fat suit, which was like, it was such and Friends is not the only perpetrator of that. I feel like bringing out a fat suit was like the laziest way to get a laugh always.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's bringing this up and continuing that. I think this really set the scene for a lot of people, not only women, but also men, to have extreme body dysmorphia, because you're looking at these examples of people who are being called like fat and disgusting and, oh my God, you gained so much weight and you let yourself go. And then when you look back on it now, it's like they were size 4 or 6 or 8 or 10. And it's just, oh my gosh, I was such a like all of these horrible things that people used to say, which were always the brunt of the joke. And we're looking back on it now, and it's no wonder everybody has body image issues. No wonder everybody has body dysmorphia. Because if you're being told that a size 4 or a size 6 is the worst thing that you could ever be, do we all have to be a 0? Do we like, what about 00 or whatever? And oh my God, I remember in my own struggle with an eating disorder, it was like the pursuit of the next smaller size is like constantly. And then if you went down a size, oh, that's not good enough. You have to go down to the next one. And when we think back on this stuff, I think Kate Winslet just spoke out about this also, is being objectified so much and then really reinforcing that body dysmorphia that no wonder we all have. Because when we look back at these examples of Friends and The Biggest Loser and Jillian Michaels, it's like, first, when we had the heroin chic of the 90s, it was like, whoa, optimism, like models, but I could never do that. And we didn't really have the tools to do that, aside from trying to do what was exemplified for us with our moms or parents or brothers or sisters or at school, right? Then when we switch over to The Biggest Loser and Jillian Michaels and all these different things, it's, oh, if you want to do that, here's tools. Like all of these people could do it. You should be able to do it too. And then when you also layer in the basically body dysmorphia of size 4 is horrible, size 6 is horrible, size 8 is horrible, it's, oh my gosh, okay, now I know I should be small. Here are the tools that I should do it. If I can't do it, then I'm a failure and there's something wrong with me. And
it is.
And that doesn't even include people who are
to that point. There's like, nobody ever talks about the plateau, which is like perfectly normal. I also struggled with eating disorders off and on in my teens and in my early 20s. And it just, if you don't understand that, you just don't understand why you don't get smaller. It's like, I'm starving myself, I'm miserable, but I can't get past this size. And all you see is the number to that point. And then I look back at photos now and it's like, I look really sad and I look really thin, but it just does not compute in your brain because all you see is the size. And women's sizes too are so inconsistent even to this day. So you could be like a size 8 at one store and be a size 14 at the next store. So that doesn't help either.
Easily.
Because, if you're having a bad day, you go into a store and they're like, guess what? You're 4 sizes larger than you thought. And you're already struggling with body dysmorphia or disordered eating. Like, that's a recipe for disaster.
For sure. I think also too, it's like there's so much like what you're talking about, Dana, as well, is about the reinforcing of the body dysmorphia. We now no longer have any sense of what our body should, like what our body should look, kind of indoctored into looking externally for what we're supposed to look like and what we're supposed to be doing. And I'm thinking too, like, that's like, I don't know, at least for me at that age, getting Cosmo magazine and wanting to Teen Bop and like all of those types of magazines and stuff like that. And then there were those things that had, what I eat in a day and how many calories to have and all this different stuff. And if like they had those little calculators in there that would say, okay, if you want to lose weight, here's what you need to do. And this is how many calories you need to cut out. Here's a meal plan for you. And like, if you're a teenager or a young adult who doesn't have the education and you're going to these platforms, these, magazines and these places, and you're reading these articles about the individual talking or the celebrity talking about how they got fit for the role and all this stuff and things they're doing. I mean, I remember very distinctly thinking, I want to look like Jennifer Aniston. So I'm going to read everything that she's doing about her body and I'm going to implement it. Did I end up looking like Jennifer Aniston? Absolutely not. Like, I'm not her. Like, my body is totally different than hers. But man, did I want to die of that, right? But we didn't have there was no place to say, actually, this is wrong. It was just continuing to be reinforced of, well, if you just did it better, or if you were more strategic about it, or there's some kind of almost like a personal failure if you don't obtain it as a result. And most of the time, those articles and those things that we would read in the stories, like most of the time, the women weren't really sharing what they were. They were like, oh, I'm just to watch what I eat. I drink plenty of water and I go to the gym. It's like bullshit. We all know what you're doing. And we all know that you're engaging in really risky behavior. And why can't you just tell us, no, I actually do have cellulite. They just airbrushed it all off and you can't see it now. Or I actually engaged in really unhealthy behaviors. That's really refreshing to hear about Channing and Zac Efron and Luke, right? From discussing that and saying like, this is not sustainable. I can't maintain this type of thing. Because now like you said, like the generations underneath us have that little bit of a reality check where we didn't get that. Millennials did not check. It got layered on top of on.
We just kind of understand more that people with money have access to more than normal people do. They have access to, say, private chefs that can stock their fridge with like any ingredient they want. A lot of times these diets are not cheap either. It's also just like expensive to eat healthy sometimes, especially if you're in a food desert. If you don't have access to fresh foods, which I think a lot of people don't take into account when they're looking down upon people that say eat unhealthily or are overweight. They also, like famous people, can't afford to work out like twice a day, maybe 3 times a day, because guess what? They get paid to do that. They probably can also write that off on their taxes. Isn't that nice? Like, that's something that normal people can't. So I do appreciate that in terms of like the pulling the wool away from our eyes today and age. I think that like the one big hurdle we have now is that so many of them lie about how fast they lose the weight, and it turns out they're all just on Ozempic. Like that's the one right now. It's like, I know you didn't just diet and exercise. Come on, like you can't lose that much weight in 3 months. Kelly Clarkson.
No, that's not how that works, guys. Like that's not how the body works. But no, it's so true. I think that's also like that's an interesting kind of add-on too, because what it made me think of, and I wonder if you thought this too, Dana, but it made me think of social media and like the rise of social media as millennials. And in the beginning, it almost like in a way right now we're seeing a bit more of like you said, Pam, like the removal of the veil a little bit of like, we can actually like look at it like, like that's not how like the math in. Like you can look at that and kind of do that. But back when it first started, it didn't feel like that. We didn't have we hadn't seen so much of the same type over and over and over again to the degree that we have now, that we couldn't really discern as much what was fact and fiction in social media. Whereas now you kind of a little bit easier, I find, look at it and be like, oh, like I'm not sure if this is real, but you of like, Dana, what were you like? Did that come to mind for you too? Because that was like immediate for me.
And I mean, when you think about the access of Instagram, not only to the app in the beginning, but the access that you had to the capacity of editing photos was so different. Like when we think of our high school and college days, if we would just bring out those little cameras and take 300 pictures and upload a photo or an album, not a photo, to Facebook, there was no editing or anything going on with the everyday us regular people. And I think there was a little bit of a distinction of, okay, if someone's in the Sports Illustrated swimsuit magazine, of course there's going to be some editing and whatever going on. But now every single person has access to Photoshop and airbrushing and AI and everything like that. So it's so much harder, even if we do know that there's a little bit more of a discerning eye of, okay, there's probably some AI going on or there's probably some airbrushing or editing. But for whatever reason, I don't think that my friends are doing that. I don't think that the everyday regular person is doing that, or even some influencers. When I look at celebrities, when I look at the Kardashians, when I look at Beyonce, when I look at Miley Cyrus or whatever, I'm like, yeah, they're probably like editing these photos and they're super stylized and whatever. But then with the regular people, I guess I'm just more optimistic maybe that they're not airbrushing and all these different things. But then when you look at that, and you're like, wait, do people actually look like this? So flawless and no imperfections and no pimples and no cellulite and no all of these different things. It's so freaking complicated. And that's, I think, one of the things that we wanted to continue to drive home at every point of this episode and this whole season is like, this stuff is so complicated. And it's no wonder that we all struggled with body image growing up. We have set the scene for millennials struggling with body image, continued to this day, because there's so much nuance to this conversation. And it's really hard to see through the bullshit because now there's not only one level of bullshit, there's 27 layers of bullshit that it's so hard to see what is real, what is not. And not only that, but what is realistic for me and how do I stop aspiring to be these completely unrealistic beauty standards and aesthetics and Instagrams and people in, Christina likes to say, they're all beige houses with their beige Stanleys and their beige babies and their beige couches and all these different things. It's too much to handle. And we have so much other crap going on in our lives, but body image and food tend to just live in our heads rent free. Everyone's talking about food noise right now with Ozempic. But it's just too much sometimes.
I'm really glad you brought up the age of filters and also just how good they're getting. Cause, listen, I talked about the podcast that I do, Millennial. We do well. We're not like the biggest podcast in the world. Every once in a while, we'll get messages from listeners and they always ask Laura, my co-host, and I was like, I need some help with makeup because you guys always look so good on camera. And I'm always like, baby, it's the ring light, That's like the first thing when we have our social media manager, Chloe, DM them back because they want to know what we use or whatever. I'm always like, please, number one, right at the top, let this person know that it's the ring light. It's the ring light and the camera just it all balances out. I have so much more texture than what it looks like on any social media.
Yeah, you can see the ring light.
Yeah, exactly. I don't wear
You can
glasses,
see it in my
so it's
glasses, guys.
it's the ring light gets so much. Even the TikTok, the regular just TikTok camera, because sometimes we have to film TikToks for the show and stuff like that. Even that, I feel does not look like me when I'm putting on makeup in a mirror. Without I mean, I'll turn on the enhancement if I have a blemish or whatever. I don't and I'm honest about that. But even if I turn it off, I'm just this is something here does not look quite like me. It's still getting rid of all the texture, even if you don't ask it to. And so and I constantly remind myself of that too, because I'll look at my face. Everybody looks at their face more than anybody else does. But it's important if you do any kind of that stuff or if you use it for business or pleasure to just kind of check yourself every once in a while, because it's so easy to get a distorted view of yourself and then just start looking at yourself in normal mirrors and feeling worse about yourself because you don't understand why you don't walk around in real life looking like how you do through the TikTok lens, for example, or with a ring light on. So, yeah. But
I think one of the things that, one, I'm really excited. I feel like we could talk about, we didn't even talk about all of the areas in pop culture that have.
I mean, how could we?
The whole show could be just about pop culture influence. And so I'm really excited that we got to have this in with you and talk about these like big, like kind of iconic moments that really hit home for us and that heavily influence us. And I mean, just even the rise of influencers in general, that is something that we grew up with. Like we've seen from magazines at the grocery store, like Dana said, all the way through to on our phones, these people who are our neighbors down the street who are now influencers and they're doing all this stuff and editing this through. It does kind of change the game a little bit around us and how we feel, how we're supposed to present ourselves and what is acceptable and what's not acceptable. Almost like it's like there's like this bar that's been set that we have to somehow maintain, keep up with. And if we don't, then there's something wrong with us. And I think that's like the main for me of like, it's no wonder why millennials specifically have such complex body image stuff, because we have been bombarded with this from a really young age, whether it's just watching our mom count their almonds that they ate, or if it was us in the grocery store or trying to go prom dress shopping. I'm like, it's the exact, the whole thing about it over and over and over again. And I don't feel like the influence is stopping. I think even with the rise of Ozempic, we're seeing even more. It's trickier. It's different. And to me, and I think for Dana, like our main point with this podcast is to really help you be able to create that discerning eye of, all right, what's fact from fiction and what's real and what's not real and what is smoke and mirrors here and how can I kind of like in a way de-influence myself a little bit.
Yeah, it's its own version of media literacy. That's something that we talk about a lot on Millennial in terms of, honestly, usually in terms of like politics, right? Like we talk about how media literacy is important in terms of discerning what is a spin and what is objective and what is subjective. But you can apply media literacy to pop culture as well and to all the points you brought up. I know something that we didn't really, I think something that one of you glossed over was just like the spoon feeding of like what was deemed as like a fat body or a curvier body with somebody like Jessica Simpson.
Mm-hmm.
I know Hillary Duff came up as well. The fact that she was considered chubby, that is a crime against humanity. I think about like my favorite movie growing up, Now and Then. Chrissy was supposed to be the fat one and she was just like a normal size. I watched that movie back. I'm like, she was just a normal size kid. Like that's just like looking little girl. But they told us that she was fat because she was bigger than the other girls that they cast, against her. Same with like America Ferrera, she's lost quite a bit of weight. But when we were first introduced to her, she was like the fat friend, like
sisterhood of the traveling pants.
Had to be ticked. But she must have been like a size 12, which again is like perfectly normal. That movie back then, you're like, oh, she looks great. Like, why did I think? Like somebody told me, oh, but she was the fat one. And you go, oh yeah, of course she was the fat one. Like that makes sense. Like that was for me in terms of the work that I've done in therapy is trying to block out that noise and make the objective opinion instead of the knee-jerk reaction, which is just to believe what the media is telling you or what pop culture is telling you, which is tough.
100%. Pam, we wanted to thank you so much for coming on today. This was so great. As Christina mentioned, I'm sure we could talk about this for multiple episodes, and maybe we'll have you come back on and we can dive into a different aspect of this. But we would love it if you could share all the places that people can find you.
Yes, I am at Pamela Gocobachi almost everywhere online. My last name is a mouthful, so I hope you guys spell it out.
We'll
for
spell
people
it,
if they're curious. Yeah, you can come hang out with me. Literally almost everywhere online with that handle. And then if you want to check out any of the podcasts that I host, you can go to millennialshow.com for Millennial. And you can go to whatthehypepodcast.com for What the Hype. And we have links to all the social media channels on there. And we have links to all the episodes on there as well.
Amazing. Thank you again so much.
Thank you.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Hey friends, it's Dana. We hope you absolutely loved Pam's episode all about body image and pop culture today as much as we did. If you're looking to find Pam anywhere at any of the podcasts that she mentioned, on Instagram, social media, anything, all of that is in the show notes. And then quick reminder before we wrap up today that the last episode of every month is available exclusively on our Patreon community and for Apple Podcast subscribers. So next week's episode will be exclusively over there, and it is all about struggling with body image in the age of Ozempic. and how frustrating it can be when it feels like every celebrity and influencer and random person on the street might be taking these drugs but not disclosing it. And we also have a little bonus following today's episode with a little bit of a blooper reel that we are sure you're going to enjoy. So you can check all of that out, as well as the other 2 bonus episodes that we dropped this month over at patreon.com/millennial body image project.